everyone. Welcome to our Truffle Webinar Series. We're so happy to have you join today. This is actually episode 3 of the series. So we're kind of continuing down that journey of exploring the full life cycle of developing and deploying a Dapp with confidence. We really want to empower you guys to feel like you can go out there and create some awesome Dapps. So today our hosts are Kevin and Josh. So Josh is a new surprise guest host for us. We're excited. He'll be kind of stepping in for Amal today. And just want to do a quick reminder about Crowdcast. This is the streaming platform we're using today. As you can see on the right-hand side, you're familiar. That's where we can chat. You can actually add questions there if you want, and then add them to the Ask a Question queue. That's where we'll be able to know. We'll kind of queue those up for the end, and then Kevin and Josh will be able to answer any questions you might have, and they can expound on that stuff. If you see any questions someone else asked, and you have that same question, go ahead and upvote it instead of adding the same one again. Also, we have some polls, if you've noticed. If you can fill them out, if you haven't already, that would be great. That gives Josh and Kevin a sense of where you are and what kind of information you'd like to learn about. And finally, if you wanted to record a clip moment in the far left bottom, if you wanted to, this whole webinar is recorded and you can watch a full replay, but if you wanted to just record certain pieces of the replay or the moment of this video, you can. So that's a neat little Crowdcast feature. So thank you again for joining, and I'll hand the microphone over to Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you, Shay. And as Shay welcome to this episode. It does say up there, deploy and monitor, but we're going to be doing a lot more than that as we go through this. Just to introduce ourselves, if this is your first time joining us, my name is Kevin Bluer. I'm the head of training and ecosystem engineering here at Truffle. With that, I'll pass over to Josh, who's stepping in for Amal this week, to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Hey, everyone. I'm Josh Quintel. I'm the head of product and marketing here at Truffle, and I am very excited to show you all Teams today.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Cool. Again, just kind of context about this series, because again, we've kind of tried to design it so, if you are kind of dipping in and out, that's totally fine. There's, you'll still get something from it. You won't have missed out too much. So just to give you context, if it is your first episode, really the goal with this series is to explore the complete life cycle of building a decentralized app or Dapp. We've got like a nice little visualization here on this slide of the typical life cycle stages you might go through. And as we mentioned in prior episodes, historically Truffle has more been centered on the left-hand side here. Not exclusively, but that's been kind of mostly where the tooling has kind of been focused or kind of living. That's changed with Teams, which is our kind of latest product, where we kind of have a much more robust story around the right-hand side of this flow. Cool. And then in terms of the roadmap, as I mentioned earlier, when we kind of planned out this series, we thought, it's going to be that we'll focus on a couple of those, stages per episode. That said, as we've evolved it, we've we are jumping back and forth a lot more, hopefully in a way that makes sense. We're kind of moving around this life cycle going forward and kind of going back a little bit. This one, we're actually going to be, although it does say monitor and operate, we're actually going to be going through the full life cycle again and kind of starting a new surprise project that will allow us to kind of build on what we've seen thus far in the context of, again, a new project. Just to cover off what we talked about in the last episode, if you didn't make it, really was a focus on Ganache, which is your local kind of personal blockchain environment that you would use as part of your development workflow. We looked at kind of what is Ganache. We looked at kind of the philosophy behind it, the why, how it makes development, gives you all the constructs you need, to work locally. We also looked at the various flavors of Ganache. We have obviously a CLI version that you can also kind of instantiate programmatically. We have a UI-based version, which is really great for beginners, particularly if you're kind of starting out, getting familiar with this space. And we also have the concept of sandboxes in Teams, which is kind of hosted Ganache instances. And we looked at all 3 of those flavors in action. And in the context of sandboxes, the third flavor we looked at that in a kind of brief kind of preview of Truffle Teams. This episode, we're going to be going a lot deeper on that and using sandboxes in context. And, as mentioned, going through the whole life cycle, including going a lot deeper in Teams itself. Quick recap on the challenge, because at the end of each episode, we've been posing a challenge kind of to work on. I feel the last one was a little bit lightweight. We didn't really go too deep, on explaining what it was. For anyone who did, or even if you didn't get a chance to explore the challenge, it was basically going through the repo that we put out there. This I think it was webinar episode 01, and just kind of try that in the context of Teams. So cloning it within Teams, deploying it, sending a transaction, and so on. Don't worry at all if you didn't get a chance to do that, or if this is your first episode, because we're going to kind of be doing that again. This time a lot more kind of methodically or systematically. And the same applies to that advanced one. That was really just to add some additional functionality to essentially the simple storage contract that we evolved beyond just a simple storage contract. Again, really don't worry if you didn't get a chance to tackle that at all. We didn't give that much detail either, to be quite honest. All right, so getting into episode 3. But before we do, let's just check in on the poll. So as Shay mentioned, it should be at the bottom of the bottom of your screen. You should see the poll button. Just click on that. You should see these questions. And then I think they're all binary, yes, no's. So, first one, just to say them out loud, is have you used Truffle Teams before? Yes, no. And have you used Open Zeppelin before? Because we're going to be using that as part of this project. I've used a CLI debugger. Yes, no. And then the last one's more rhetorical. How do you currently troubleshoot contracts? And again, I think there might be that question there, but that's more open-ended. And that's really just to because that's something we're going to be doing in this episode today.
Yeah, and as Kevin mentioned, we did add that as a question queued up for the end. So Kevin and Josh, you can expound on that. And then the other ones in the polls, we'll give you guys a few seconds here if you haven't already answered, but I'll go ahead and let you guys know, Kevin and Josh, what has been the result so far, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sure.
So yep. So far we are looking at what is your experience with Truffle Teams? Most of the votes is I haven't used it yet, but I would love to learn more. We do have some people who have currently used it to manage deployments, and there's a few that have tried it, but they don't currently use it. So just giving you a sense there. With Open Zeppelin, actually, quite a few people have used it, and a few haven't. And then finally, the Truffle CLI debugger, kind of have a mixed bag of people who have used it and who have not. So that just gives you a sense of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Shay. Cool. And if if there was no's to most of those things, don't worry. That's kind of the reason we ask those questions, because that's partly what we're going to be exploring in a given episode. So yeah, great. All right, so what we're going to be covering in this episode, as mentioned, Teams, don't need to dwell on this too much. Really, we're just going to be going through a number of the core features of Teams and doing them hopefully a lot more justice than we did last episode, because it was super brief, more of a quick peek. This time we're going to be going a lot deeper. And as mentioned, we're going to be doing it in the context of a new Halloween-themed project, given Halloween is a couple of days away. And we've got creative and thrown some bats onto all the slides from here on out as well, for a bit of fun. All right, so with that, just to kind of set the stage, kind of reframing what is Teams, what is Truffle Teams. I'll kind of start with this, and then I'll perhaps pass over to Josh just to build on my answer, given Josh is the product manager for Teams and can probably explain it far better than I. But in a nutshell, Teams is blockchain operations for everyone. So obviously most projects that you might build, of course, developing those, writing the contracts, deploying them, testing, etc., is a key part of that. But in any given project, that's not the only role that is needed, right? So Teams is designed to address that. So if you're on the administrative side or operational management side, or product manager, Teams is a first-class citizen for you as well. So with that, I'll let Josh perhaps add a bit more depth to that explanation as well.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Teams really, thinking back to like the application lifecycle that we're going to take a look at today, kind of as we mentioned in the beginning, like Truffle's open source suite really handles the left-hand side of that lifecycle really well, the development portion. So as far as your actual development experience, testing, debugging, things of that nature, at least as when it comes to your local machine. But then the other side of that life cycle really is this operational side, like managing multiple deployed instances, monitoring your contracts, things of that nature. And so that's really, as the ecosystem has been maturing and the applications within it have been as well, we're hearing more and more of a need on that side for those kind of operational concerns. And that's exactly what we built Truffle Teams to address.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh. Cool. So moving on. Who's this? This is, for those that don't know Tim, this is Tim Coulter, our founder and CEO, or the founder and CEO of Truffle. He likes to dress up, particularly around Halloween, and his favorite costume is this Willy Wonka outfit. So he's saying Happy Halloween, and he's got a new project request for us. And he's given us some high-level kind of brain dump of what he wants. So he's just kind of stepped in. This is what he wants. Basically, he wants us to create a unique Halloween-themed truffle badge that can be awarded to either webinar participants, such as yourselves, or perhaps other people involved in different capacities. A bit of kind of novel thing to award to people. He wants them to be tradable via marketplaces. So if they were at some point to have intrinsic value and someone was willing to pay for these badges, maybe that's a bit aspirational, but let's say that were the case, then we want that to be supported by some of these marketplaces that facilitate that. By kind of extension, he wants them on a public network, and he showed some buzz around the ability to store assets such as badges, that essentially underlying images and or metadata decentrally as well, because these are things you don't typically store on chain. So that's another request there. So he's kept it pretty high level. He's kind of just stepped in, and this is what he's asked for. So, and this is what we're going to be doing. As mentioned, this is a new project, and we're going to be going through this life cycle, building out Tim's desire there, or his request. A couple of caveats. Firstly, as mentioned, kind of what we've been doing in the episodes thus far. We'll be jumping back and forth a little bit. This life cycle that we've been referring to. It's not always kind of going in a kind of linear step. Step. There's often a bit of jumping back and forth. So we're going to be doing that, but in the right way, hopefully. And also, it may be that almost certainly we're going to be spanning this over at least an episode today and probably the next episode as well, just to kind of set the expectation there. Okay, so just to unpack briefly, by the way, we really trimmed down slides this time. We've got a couple more slides, and then the rest, I didn't stress this at the start, is going to be all hands-on. So we're hoping that the demo gods are looking down upon us favorably today. But before we do that, before we switch over to kind of hands-on, just to unpack or explore Tim's requirements, kind of at that planning stage, because that's obviously a little bit more, typically, I would say somewhat technical, but you also need, it's taking the requirements and kind of mapping them to the what, or the how, how you're going to do it, the implementation. So first requirement from Tim was Halloween-themed badges, truffle badges. Now, in this context, again, if you've been in this space for a little while, you've probably heard the acronym NFT, stands for non-fungible token. Basically, that's a unique token that kind of non-divisible or indivisible, and they're all different, and that's the goal. With this, every of these badges need to be unique and awarded to different people and so on. We are not, another good practice is where possible, not reinventing the wheel. So I think we mentioned Open Zeppelin last episode as a great library of contracts, and they have an implementation of this standard, the NFT standard. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But out of the box, their implementation and basically the standard itself doesn't have a kind of externally facing kind of minting or awarding mechanic or function built into it. So that's something we're going to need to add to make that, to tick that requirement. To mention, they want some tradable by marketplaces. So for that, we're going to be exploring a couple of these marketplaces exist today. A very popular one is something called OpenSea. So as long as you're adhering or implementing the standard or the interface of the standard, you can quite easily just put them up there. And they have a process for that, of course, to get them listed. And they also have it on a test net, so you can kind of try it out and stuff. So we'll kind of be exploring that probably in the next episode for that one. You also mentioned a public network, again, by extension, to put them on marketplaces, public-facing marketplaces. They need to be on a public-facing network. I would most likely use Rinkeby, because that's the testnet that OpenSea uses. Use that as as our testing environment as well. And then lastly, he wants the assets stored decentrally. And for that, we're going to be using IPFS to store the metadata and the associated images as well. Here's some of the badges. So we asked Brian on the team, who's one of, amongst other things, our designer. And he created 4, just to get the ball rolling, of these awesome looking badges that we'll be awarding to people. As I mentioned, they're all unique. And just briefly, and I think this is the last, or thereabouts the last slide before we go all in hands-on, just to kind of unpack the ERC 721 standard a little. Basically, don't worry about the detail on here, but if you want to kind of adhere to the standard, then you just need to implement these interfaces or these functions on the left, and then the events on the right. And as long as you do that, as long as you have functionality behind each of those functions, you're essentially compliant of the standard. But because it's a standard, there's a lot of great projects, implementations of that. I won't say one of the best, but certainly maybe is the best. One of the best is by OpenZeppelin. It's obviously a community centric thing, well audited, heavily used, well audited, and so on. And more detail here in their docs. So we're going to be using that, and as mentioned, we're going to be extending it. But again, don't get if you are brand new to it and you go, gosh, what's an NFT? Then don't panic. We'll be going through this quite systematically. I just wanted to kind of just give a little preview of this, and these are some of the functions that are going to be kind of out of the box to us. Okay, so that is it in terms of slides, and the rest from here on in is going to be fully hands-on. Hence why we put the little kind of warning signs there that sometimes demos when you go through them go a little bit funky. So we'll fingers crossed with this. I say that's the last slide. This is the very last one that we'll be showing before that kind of closing slides and stuff at the very end. And this is just to set the stage. So we are going to look at a project in a moment wherein we've already added OpenZeppelin to it. So you can obviously via Yarn or NPM. We've created a couple of placeholder things. So we've created a test. We'll be looking at test first. It's going to fail. Firstly, if you recall back to the first episode, we kind of explored that concept of test-driven development, where you write the tests, they fail to start with because you haven't actually implemented that functionality yet. So we're going to sort of very loosely, carry on down that theme, create a kind of base contract that imports the ERC 721 implementation that we mentioned, and then the final kind of point here, don't worry about. We've already put these assets up on IPFS, but we'll get to that in a little bit more depth, potentially next episode. But these are the things we've kind of done already. So with that, I'm going to jump out of the slides and jump into. Well, this is on my dev environment, just as a side note, and there's a few new things that we wanted to show on the, not yet live, so we're going to give you a preview of those. But again, fingers crossed, all looks good as it all goes well as we go through this. So that's Teams. But before we get into Teams, hopefully you can see my screen okay, or the code here. I've bumped the font size up, hopefully enough. And all of this that we're seeing is going to be, we'll share the link to this repo separately if you want to try all this out yourselves. So first things first, as mentioned, this is the test, a very simple one. Basically, it is attempting to award a badge, or it's testing the functionality of awarding a badge. So just like we saw in episode 1, we've just kind of got the kind of test construct stuff here, creating an instance of the badge, and then we're attempting to invoke award badge. Right now, this function just accepts one address, and in theory, if it works, essentially adds in it creates a badge or mints a badge and assigns, adds it to that account, and then we just do an assertion. We do a test for the balance of the badges on that account equals 1 by passing, doing a balance of and passing in the address, and that should, in theory, return 1. That all said, we haven't actually yet. We can actually test this out. This is going to be just local to start with, obviously. And there's only a couple of things we're going to be doing locally, and then we'll sort of graduate ourselves over to Teams and see how that fits into the life cycle there. So as expected, that failed, right? Well, I expected it to. You may not have had an opinion yet, but that's failed. And the reason being is in our implementation, we have, as I say, we've already installed OpenZeppelin. We've imported ERC 721. We're inheriting from it. And then upon construction, essentially there's this modifier syntax where we are creating an instance of this badge, or the ERC 721 contract is being deployed upon, or being kind of created upon deployment or constructed. However, as mentioned, there is no award badge functionality, out of the box or minting and so on. The mint function is actually internal. So that's why that's failing. Now I'm going to kind of fast forward. I'm going to mimic now a couple of roles, as in I'm going to be doing a little bit of dev here. I'll kind of pull out one that I prepared earlier. I'm going to then jump over to Teams. We're going to explore the build process. And then I'm going to actually, hopefully it's in a good state. That test's going to be passing. And then I'm going to loop in Josh to then say, hey, let's, Josh, let's, I think this might be working. Let's test this out. So to do that, I'm going to check out another branch. So step 1, and magically an implementation of this award badge function appears. So this looks good to me. We're invoking mint. So it's, as we saw in the test, this takes in a single parameter of an address, an account address, and we've got an ID. We pass in that address to the internal mint function and this ID, and it returns the ID. So let's just quickly try the test locally again. Sorry for the background noise. Awesome, that passes this time. So I think this implementation is looking good. So with that, I'm going to now, more elegantly, perhaps, loop in Josh. To start with, fire up Teams. A few things I've done already is, and again, if you're new to Teams, Teams is centered around a GitHub repository for a given project, and obviously that can be many projects that you might be working on. What you would do is just click add a repository, give GitHub permissions, or Teams to have the appropriate permissions, to access any either all your repos or a given repo that you give it permissions to. And then it will take you back into Teams, and the first screen you'll see once you've wired up a repository is this one, and it would kick off a build or an attempted build on master, the master branch, and then any commits to any branch will kick off another build. And as per give it any CI system, it will just show the output of the execution of those tests or the running of those tests, e.g. do they pass or fail. And you can go into the build details and so on, or restart it. So I've already done that a bunch on this environment, hence why you're seeing a bunch of successful executions of the tests and a few failures and so on. So this is typically what you'll see, and particularly if there's multiple folks working on a given project, you'll see this kind of flowing with different commits as they get pushed to your repository. So I think my functionality works pretty well thus far. So what we're now going to do is, and by the way, build step 1, and that corresponds to step 1 that I just checked out, and I forced to build earlier, so that one passed as we saw locally. So I've kind of just fast forwarded through that. Now what I'm going to do is I think I want to get Josh to kind of test this out in a kind of collaborative manner. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and do a few things. There'll be a couple of things I'll do first, then I'll kind of loop in Josh. So I'm going to call this, Truffle badge sandbox. And if you recall back to the previous episode, we looked at sandboxes. So this is a Ganache instance in the cloud, in quotes, that we can collaborate upon. So it's not just isolated to me using it, of course. So the first thing I've done here is created a sandbox, which is awesome. You can see the RPC URL. Yours will be, if you're on production, it will look just a bit different. It's just more of a fully qualified URL as opposed to not. But essentially everything you're seeing is identical. Other than there's going to be a few sneak preview features that you see just because we're on my development environment here. We'll get to those later. So we've got sandbox. I now want to deploy to this new sandbox so Josh can test it. And I'm going to deploy the output of that build that kicked off, essentially step 1, where I'd implemented that functionality, that award badge function that I think works pretty great. So with that, let me go over to Truffle Badge Sandbox. You can choose which account you're deploying it from. Context, you can deploy it to an existing, well, in this case, it has to be a new deployment. So I'll just call this deployment demo. That's already there, actually. Deployment live demo 1. All right, so that's going to go off and do its thing. Essentially, this is similar steps to what would be happening locally when you do a deployment. One difference is it runs this in its own container, so it installs Truffle briefly. It takes a moment, compiles, does the deployment to the sandbox, etc., and then gives us the contract addresses. So while it's doing that, let me just open up another tab. And I think, Josh, you have the sandbox URL here, right? So this is the sandbox URL. I'm also just going to queue myself up so I can do a first test of this before I pass it over to Josh. So let me just take that URL, go back to my VS Code. And then what you typically do is just paste in this as a network, just like you would if you want to deploy it to, if you've got familiarity with Truffle and things we put in the config. This is essentially a target network that you want to deploy to or interact with. In a moment, just like we saw last time, we're going to be using the console to fire off the first transaction. That network is going to need to be updated. So just do that quickly there. See how this deployment's getting on. Okay, it's nearly done. And then sometimes the dev environments can obviously be a bit slower than
and then actually, when you get a chance for me to copy paste, if you could, well, I mean, obviously the contract address when you've got a second, but that, and then also the sandbox URL.
Yes. Shall I put them where? I'll do that in a sec, Josh. But yeah, I know you need that. So yeah, what Josh was asking for, because I'm not going to commit these to GitHub. Ordinarily, you might, or just Slack them over, which I can do in a moment. So we'll do that. So you can just see here that I've done a deployment. I gave it a name, deployment live demo to this sandbox. So those contracts are now deployed to the sandbox. And then I just kind of wired it up such that I can connect to it from my local machine here. So again, we did this last episode, Truffle console, network, sandbox. And oops. So what I'm going to do now is just test this again. Of course, keep having Git. So just create an instance of this. And there's one step I missed actually. So this is the deployment, and then this is the contract address here. So again, I need to, some of these steps are a little bit manual. We actually have some, yeah, we're getting the right place here.
Another thing I'll note while you're doing that is, yeah, Kevin normally wouldn't have to Slack this to me, but since we're using his local dev environment, we had to give up some of the normal conveniences that come with working with teams in production teams. Like what you'll experience when you sign up is you'd just be seeing the same thing. So like I could have just copy pasted it from Teams interface itself, but in this case, we kind of got to do some message passing here manually.
Totally, Josh. Yeah, I should have stressed that bit. So I'll just give you the first part. So yeah, look away while I do that. Just kidding. But yeah, ordinarily you'd both be, if I was doing this on production, then you'd see, literally be able to see this exact same screen of, the sandboxes that we're working and collaborating against. And as Josh said, the contract addresses it's been deployed to. So yeah, a little bit of kind of sort of manual stuff just because we're doing this on my dev environment. So let me just back up again just to make sure I connected to the right contract there. I think I updated that. So let's do that again. Truffle badge deployed. And let's try awarding a badge to the first account. See what we get. Okay, getting a lot of green. That's good. That's a successful transaction, hopefully. So as I say, I'm pretty bullish on this. I think this is working kind of great. So now we can go in and see transactions. So this was fired from my local machine to this cloud, instance or this hosted instance of Ganache. And the nice thing as well, you can actually, this is a relatively new feature, you can actually go in and debug or just replay. This was successful. So it's not really a case of we're debugging it per se because there was no issue, but we can actually go ahead and kind of replay this, the functionality here. One thing that's new that's going to be going live relatively soon is, well, the debugger's there already under something called early access. We'll talk about that later. Basically, you just need to toggle it on. But we have some new kind of preview things here as well, in the sense we've got breakpoints. It's about to go live. You can see kind of me hovering around here. You can create breakpoints wherever you want, and they appear in this tray down on the right-hand side. We also have syntax highlighting. This is kind of just close to being finished. Not everything's properly kind of highlighted right now, so that's why it's a bit funky there. But either way, so this seemed to work. So let me just actually step through briefly. And this was this minting taking place. You can see the badge ID and the address that it came from. And I'll say you get this little green tick in the top right there. If I just kind of run to the end, that's done actually. Just went back to the start. So good, all good. That seemed to work as well in the sandbox. It worked locally when we ran the test, and now it's worked in the sandbox. So now let me just go back into, the transactions list here. And now so Josh is gonna have a little play with this. This is where we demo gods if it works. Otherwise I could just do it myself. But the idea is, he's gonna have a hack around and we'll see transactions show up under here. And I'm bullish. I think they're hopefully all gonna work. So let's see. So Josh, let me know how you're getting on with the testing.
Yeah, so let me, I'm gonna try to award a couple badges here. We'll see how this works out.
While Josh is doing that as well, what you're seeing here also applies to other non-sandbox networks, e.g., and what I mean specifically is the monitoring side. So all the transactions that show up or that are essentially run against your contracts, obviously in the context of a sandbox, which is what we're seeing right now, but also in the context of any deployments that you've made to public networks, test nets or mainnet, will also show up under here as well. So you can really keep an eye on them. Debugging isn't currently supported for public networks yet, but that's imminent as well. So literally any transaction that takes place on a sandbox or otherwise, very soon you'll be able to go ahead and actually, we call it debug, but it's also, I like to think of it as kind of replayability as well, because not all of them are inherently failing, of course. So any transactions coming through yet, Josh? Any luck? If not, I can just kind of fire them off as well from my local machine, and we can just pretend it's coming from Josh. Because like I said, we're working on my dev environment right now. So
yeah, it's looking, I'm getting a timeout on my end, so I don't think it's...
yeah, no worries. So what Josh was going to do for everyone's benefit, so just assume this is coming from Josh, is just run a little script that we created. I think he's probably having maybe some issues connecting to my sandbox because it's running on a certain IP that, blah, blah, blah. It's a bit funky.
Kevin, real quick, sorry to interrupt. When you're in the terminal, is it possible to widen the left side so that the basically our little video avatars are covering some of the code? That way you can see the right side a little bit better.
Let me just try and, how about this if I bring it up a bit?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Is that better? Good. Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks, Shay. Cool, so essentially what Josh was about to do is just execute this little script. Scripts create.js. So let's just pretend this came from Josh. And this will just fire off. And again, if you play with this repo separately, you'll see this just attempts to create 4 badges against unique addresses. And then if I refresh, it failed at the first attempt. So that came from Josh. Look, hopefully you looked away there. Oh gosh, Josh, sorry, I'll be very wooden acting here. But like what's happened is, Josh attempted another transaction. It came from me, and it failed. But like I thought my contract was working. That kind of sucks. So let's go in, and now because we have this debugger, we can go in and actually, collaboratively see what's going on. So let's say you kind of given this contract, you felt it was good. You were giving it to some of your teammates to test it, and you can see all the transactions flow through. And obviously, some of them might have problems, unexpectedly. As in that it might be the transaction might fail. And obviously, the beauty of this is you can then go ahead and dig in and play around. And the same applies to stuff on testnets or mainnet when that's enabled. So okay, let's figure out what happened there, because I thought it worked. And we can step in. As you can see, it allows you to step in beyond just the initial file. And in this case, as we saw earlier, we talked through earlier, it evokes mint, which is its internal function. Let's keep going. I won't step into. I'll step over actually, just so it doesn't get too bogged down. And there it is. It failed here. And and there's a reason string, and it complained that the token is already minted. And on the right hand side, we can see the state, decoded state, and the variables and so on, and it's 888 as well. And okay, now it looks like because it's checking for the existence of a token with that existing ID, every token needs to be unique, have a unique ID associated with it. So the fact I'd hard coded 888 was a problem. Obviously, we kind of knew that, but you get the idea. Gosh, okay, so now let me go ahead and fix that. And I've already done that, of course. So let me go check out.
And then while you're doing that, I can mention, to be even just extra explicit, since it was 50-50 on who would use the debugger and not, when we stepped into the mint function, that was inherited as part of OpenZeppelin's ERC 721 contract. And so that's why we switched over to that Solidity file, since we were now executing the mint function that was inherited from there.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Josh. Okay, so I've gone ahead and fixed that. Obviously this was slightly contrived, of course, but you get, really the idea is to show how you can kind of collaborate on that. So this implementation of it, some of the stuff is the same, of course, in terms of calling mint. This time we're using the OpenZeppelin utility, kind of counter utility, which kind of auto increments. Well, it doesn't auto increment, but it handles the incrementation of, in this case, badge IDs for us, creates the current ID to this uint, and then passes this one in, which is obviously going to be previous 1 + 1 each time. And then there's another thing going on here as well, wherein we're actually adding some metadata to the badges that we mint. So that you can see here, set token URI, again, an OpenZeppelin internal function, where it takes a given badge ID and then also takes, in this case, another parameter that we're passing in now. So we've extended this function to both take the attendee address that we want to award the badge to, but also takes in a URI, essentially a link to metadata. And the metadata is the description of the badge, and in this case, a link to the badge artwork, if we recall back the badges that Brian had created for us earlier. And now you'll see, and we'll test this out again in a moment, or we'll do another deployment and test it out, that you can see this create script has extended a little bit, and then now passes in the stuff I just mentioned, obviously the account addresses, but also these links to where we've stored the metadata on IPFS. So we'll get to that in a little bit more depth later, kind of the process for that. So let's very quickly go ahead and do another deployment now. So, okay, great. I think I've fixed that. Obviously, ordinarily I'd have committed that, and you'd see a build, and obviously the tests run again, just to speed, so we don't have to watch that churn away. We did that earlier today. So build step 2, that one passed, and on the different branch, the one I just checked out. So if I now go back to deployments again and do new deployment, and this time I'm going to deploy build step 2 to the same sandbox, and I'll call it, did I paste that? Deployment live demo 1. Let's see, kind of, probably can name this a bit better, but it's good enough for now. And go ahead and let that do its thing.
Cool. I've got 2 things to note here on the build screen and on the deployment screen. One cool thing about Truffle Teams is that it requires a lot less config in your Truffle project than you might be used to. So like in the build screen, for example, that's using what we call our internal build system. And so, you just add your repository to Teams. We'll start executing your Truffle tests for you. But we also offer another option that we call external CI. So if you go into your settings, you'll see there will be a checkbox there for it in the builds tab. And what we'll do in that case is we'll defer to any CI systems or tools that you have integrated with GitHub. So if you have Travis, CodeShip, Coveralls, any tool of your choice that integrates with GitHub, will then defer actually to those integrations, and we'll show their status on our builds page here in Teams. And then similarly with the deployment screen, we're deploying to a sandbox here, so of course we don't need to deal with a browser wallet. But if you were deploying to a live network, like you could use your in-browser wallet, in this case MetaMask, or even by extension its hardware wallets, without modifying your Truffle config. So Teams is going to handle all of that for you in the UI, which is pretty cool. Yeah,
awesome, cool. So yeah, near perfect timing there. I think this deployment or migration is just about done, and then we can test it out again. again, this is on my dev environment, so a little bit more probably sluggish than production. Great. Let's just refresh. I don't know if that auto refresh there or not, but let me just refresh. We should see it. Okay. Cool. So now we've got a new contract address that's been deployed to. Again, we're doing this kind of a little bit more kind of manually right now. Just find the network, update the address, and reuse that. And let me move it up again, Shay. So hopefully it's not too much stuff here. Just so delicate. As soon as I get too far down, there we go. Hopefully you can see that again. So I'll just essentially do the same thing again. Obviously, we've got a different signature now on that function. So let's just, before we get to that bit, so let's just create another badge to test out this, hopefully fixed implementation of the ability to award a badge. And I'll award it to just a random one. And then I'm just going to pass in a bit of dummy metadata. Ordinarily, as you saw in that script there, where we're kind of bulk loading a bunch, there's more meaningful URIs there. This one just, as long as it's a string, that's good enough, or it should be. So with that, let's go back and just hit refresh here. Oh, I think I know what I missed, actually. I think I didn't update my sandbox URL on this one, on this branch. Let me just quickly do that. Sorry, it's a little bit kind of going back over the same ground there, but that is going to be different because it was on a different branch. So kind of clunky. Sorry about that one. So that's why, because it essentially sent that transaction to the other contracted, a different sandbox, basically. So let's just quickly do that again. And then, second time lucky. Oops, award badge. ABC this time. So if we get lucky and go back to the deployments, this deployment, refresh. I think I'm probably missing something else. You get the idea. Either way, in lieu of that, what we'll now try, gosh, I don't know which one I missed. I don't want to do it a third time, or maybe I should try, I don't know. Did I get the right contract address in there? I did. Huh.
I think I'm missing something. Why did you have to switch sandboxes from the?
Oh, because this branch had a different
that's
URL
right.
with it. Yeah. So I've been kind of hacking around on different branches, so I think I muddled myself up there. But let me just do one more refresh, just in case it was being slow or something. I don't know. But you get the idea. The idea is, obviously we did another deployment to the same sandbox. I didn't actually check. It's just that this branch, to Josh's point, had a different sandbox URI or URL. But anyway, final point. I mean, I'll just go ahead and run the script anyway to reconnect, just if we get lucky and just see if they magically appear. I'm not sure. So this time the scripts create JS. Oh, one thing I missed here is, let's just see. I don't know if this will work. Let's just go ahead. Oh, that will be why on that one at least. See what we get. See if we get lucky. We were having too much luck with the demo so far. Something had to go amiss, I think. Yeah, it seemed to that script doesn't spit too much out, whether it's successful or otherwise. But basically, that I think it kind of worked. So it kind of created 4 more badges. What we should have seen, I think I just got a little bit kind of funky config going on there, is hopefully, should have seen essentially 5 successful transactions. The one that I did manually to test it, and then obviously it would have been Josh again, let's say, hypothetically, testing it again, this time passing in those, with the revised functionality or the fix, for the counter issue, the ID issue, and obviously with the metadata, we should see 5 successful transactions there. I think, again, it's just a little bit of config funkiness going on there. But anyway, hopefully that kind of gives you a good flavor of the kind of life cycle we would have gone through in terms of building something, me deploying it, passing off to a colleague to test, all collaboratively, and obviously seeing the results, as it evolves. Cool. The other final thing I think we just wanted to show, and with that I guess this one is just this dashboard, which is a relatively new thing. And you can just wire up any deployment that you've made to this dashboard interface. Let me just choose live demo 1, I guess, given we've got a bunch of, well, at least some transactions showing up under that one. Did I click? Do I need to refresh that there? Did I? Okay, yeah. And what this gives you, and again, for sandboxes, it's a little bit overkill, that's for sure. But the idea here is this is going to be far more useful for contracts that you've deployed to a real network, be that a test net or be that mainnet, of course, where you can actually keep an eye on what's going on in terms of unique, the number of unique addresses interacting with your contract or contracts plural, the total number of transactions, failed transactions, stuff going wrong, issues, number of events that have been emitted, etc. We'll see this again in the next episode when we kind of actually go through the deployment process to Rinkeby, because we haven't done that yet. As I mentioned, we probably weren't going to get there in this episode in terms of allotted time and stuff. So that cues us up for a nice thing to be exploring in the life cycle for the next episode beyond this. And we'll make sure we've got the dashboard kind of more fleshed out at that point, so you can see a lot more kind of meaningful transactions going on. Cool. Anything to add, Josh, in terms of kind of things to call out?
Not too much on this screen. Yeah, it might make sense to pass the screen to me. I was going to say, if you look in production, we have like what I use these cooking show metaphors for this, but like we do have a pre-baked pie on the production version of the site that's got a little more dashboard info and transactions.
Maybe next episode, I think.
yeah, we can use for going to Rinkeby.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think that's mainly it in terms of what we're going to sort of show in terms of the life cycle and the workflow in this episode. So with that, let's jump back to the slides and we had a couple of kind of more placeholdery slides here. Let me just go full screen. Just make sure there's nothing else that we just wanted to talk about that we haven't yet. Obviously, this was just the kind of build stuff. This was getting us set up with the sandbox. And as a side note, I think in previous episodes, we would send out the slides so you can kind of go through these a little more methodically. This was just talking about the deployment process. In this context, just deploying to a sandbox. But of course, next episode, we'll look at how you deploy to a testnet and or mainnet. And then the kind of operational kind of monitoring side where you see the transactions flow through, provided you got things configured correctly, which I think I didn't quite have there. And that's it. So with that, the next steps and challenge. So the challenge this time, and again, for what it's worth, we just put these things out there. If you don't get time or whatever, no worries. Really, the challenge this time is just to kind of go through this again. I know the last one was similar. Obviously, this is a new project. So it's a bit different in that sense, but try and get this, kind of spun up and working in your own context on Teams. If you want to explore Teams, in a little bit more of a kind of collaborative manner, even if you're just doing it kind of wearing multiple hats yourself, this sets you up nicely. If you were to loop in teammates or whatnot, if you want to kind of test the water with it in a sort of dummy project before you try it on a real one, this is what this is designed for here. Side note, we haven't got too much in the README is really empty right now. That will change imminently. So I'm going to put these steps into the README as well. As you saw earlier, there's like currently 3 branches, like step 0, which is kind of essentially an empty thing, step 1, step 2. So the idea is you can kind of follow along with those, and I'll make sure that's clearly spelled out in the README on kind of this, the different branches and kind of how you will kind of get this set up yourself. And then kind of challenge point number 2 is to add something, but bespoke thing or something new to that base Truffle badge contract. Right now, we just have this award badge function that we saw, so you can test it out first. You could maybe consider adding like a remove badge where you pass in an address and play around with getting that built out. Let's say a badge got awarded mistakenly to the wrong person, or someone said they attended a webinar and they really didn't, and you think, okay, let's remove that badge. Then maybe consider implementing that. But really, it's about whatever you want, just kind of hacking around and kind of going through this workflow. Cool. So that is it. So with that, I will pass back to Shay to talk through the community stuff, and also I think TruffleCon, which is imminent. And then we'll revert to any questions as well at the end if you have any.
Yes, thank you, Kevin and Josh. Well, first, what we'd like to do is, before we go into these last slides, let's look at our question. I think we just have the main question that we started with, which, and if you want to expound a little bit more, Kevin and Josh, but basically it was, how do you currently troubleshoot contracts? We have one answer was deploy them on a Ganache CLI container. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the group? Because this is more of like you wanted to see how everybody's currently doing it. But do you want to give tips and tricks of like the best way to go about it or the best case scenario?
Yeah, well, I think that the suggestion that was made, I think, makes total sense, deploying it in its, I guess, assuming I'm interpreting that correctly, its own Ganache kind of instance, locally, from my understanding, I think. Totally fine, and then there's, you could use a CLI debugger. Obviously, the context is important. Like we used a very generic term there, like troubleshoot. Obviously that can mean many, many different things. So figuring out the problem, is going to be contextually dependent on what the problem is. It might be an issue in your Solidity code, and like syntactical error or functionality error, whatever. But yeah, that's obviously a great way. I mean, where we went, where you could kind of expand on that is what we saw, so if you wanted to then test out with, teammates or, friends or peers or whatever, then doing it in the way we just started to explore today would definitely potentially add some value. But yeah, that would be an initial comment to that one. And unless there's anything to add from your side, Josh.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, other than like, our automated steps like automated tests, using the debugger, which, there's a CLI variant, or we demonstrated, of course, the awesome GUI variant there as well. Another feature, just to tie it into Teams and kind of give another little teaser, we're going to be rolling out a feature in Teams called the Contract Manager. And so if you've used Remix, you'll be very familiar with it. But the Contract Manager actually will generate a UI for you to interact with your contracts. But one feature kind of has over Remix or other implementations I've seen is that we actually show the full state tree of the contract in that same view as well. Actually, Kevin, I slacked you an image of it if you want to pull it up on the screen, or I don't know who's got control of it right now. But yeah, and that's great, of course, like for, troubleshooting, quick demos, integration tests, things like that. So this helps kind of make the cycle that we went through today, make it even quicker. So we wouldn't have even had to go in the console to execute a script. We could have just, came over. I could have, popped up the contract manager here and minted a couple badges and done it that way.
Nice. Thank you, Josh and Kevin. So we are at that last slide again. Again, we posted on the chat there. Would love to have you in our Truffle community. If you're not already there, please join us there, because we have different channels dedicated to these webinars where you can discuss the exercises and the demos. Kevin and Josh and Amal will provide links to different things that we've talked about, but you also have a chance to chat with your community, share ideas. We have a new channel and a new campaign called Built with Truffle, and we actually have a new expo showcase this year at TruffleCon. So if you want to jump to that next slide, Kevin. Yep, there we go. So TruffleCon, yes, it's coming up next week. We can't believe it. November 6th and 7th, Friday and Saturday. Still time to get a free ticket. Register for your free ticket. You get a free month of Truffle Teams with your registration, but you'll have access to amazing talks, amazing speakers. We've really loaded it up this year for you guys. We have a really exciting poker charity event, and this Built with Truffle showcase is essentially a chance for you guys to share with us. You'll have your own focused, uninterrupted time to chat with me and Josh, as well as anybody else from the Truffle attendees, to share your ideas and projects that you're building. And so sign up, and you have to register for TruffleCon, but then you'll get an autoresponder where there'll be a link so that you can book a spot. I think we still have a few slots left, so definitely get in there today if you're interested in doing that. And again, the button for the link here is in the chat. Oops, let me hit that return. Boom. Okay. And then the register for TruffleCon 2020 green button there you can go right there and register on Hopin. That's the platform we're using. So yeah, that we would love to have you there this year. This is going to be all these conversations about what Kevin and Josh have been talking about in this webinar series is going to be a continued conversation at TruffleCon. So I think you guys would really enjoy it and love to be there this year. So without any other things you'd like to add, Kevin and Josh, are we, in terms of the exercise or anything else you want to leave?
Nothing from my side, yeah. But as Shay mentioned, come to TruffleCon, of course, but get in touch as well. Best way to do that is through the community link, essentially the Slack community. Yeah, that link will take you through to it to get joined up. And then any questions, both in terms of kind of going back through this exercise or just in general, reach out through that, either DM or just in the any of the logical channels within that. But other than that, no, all good.
Yeah, I was gonna say best way to get these guys is on that Slack community, and that's a nice opportunity. And as you can see here, follow us on social as well. These are all the places that we try to announce things and share things with you guys. So make sure to follow us on our different channels. And we'll certainly send out a replay link to you guys for this webinar, as well as the previous ones. So you'll always have access to those on our YouTube channels, as a matter of fact. And we'll keep you posted on when the next one will be. But of course, it's going to skip after TruffleCon, which is next week. So that's going to be our big focus. So we hope to see you there. Thank you again, Kevin and Josh, for an amazing session. And we hope you guys join us for the next one.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.